Welcome back to Judah Raw's channel. In this series, we're diving into a fascinating topic: genetic data analyzed through the lens of history, both secular and biblical. This one's a bit more academic than usual, so stick with me. We'll explore DNA inheritance, haplogroups, and a surprising connection to the Roman Empire. And yes, we'll tie it all together with some scriptural insights. Let's get started. First, a quick genetics 101. Genes passes vertically from parents to kids. You get half your DNA from mum, half from dad. But some DNA follows strict rules. Mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, comes only from a mother to all her children. Mothers will characteristically pass on an X chromosome to all her children. Meanwhile, boys inherit their father's Y chromosome, making them XY, while girls get an extra X from dad, making them XX. This is the origin of the two genders. Scientists can trace Y DNA unchanged through male lines for up to 500 generations. That's where haplogroups come in. Labels like R1, J2, or E1b1b that group people by shared ancestry. Haplogroups are generally named in an easily understandable fashion. 1 and R2, they're linked to Japheth, one of Noah's sons. J1 and J2, they are often called Jewish haplogroups, but then there's haplogroup E. Things get messy here. E1b1b is labeled Jewish, yet its closely related E1b1a is called Hamitic. North Africans carry E1b1b too, and this despite being tagged as both Hamitic and Shemitic. Now that's a problem. DNA doesn't work like that. Something's off. Here's the problem. E1b1b can't be Shemitic and Hamitic all at once. To add to the confusion, some call it subclade EV13, the Roman haplogroup. But weren't the Romans Japhetic from Europe? It's a confusing genetic tangle. So I dug deeper. And what I found wasn't random or sporadic. It followed a Mediterranean pattern as shown on E1b1b frequency maps. E1b1b dominates the Mediterranean, highest in North Africa and the Horn, but it's big in southern Europe too. Some blame Moorish or Arab invasions. It's a fair enough observation, but those invasions started in the region we now refer to as the Middle East, not Africa. I felt there was something strange about this map. Then it hit me. The map looks awfully familiar. It reminded me of the Roman Empire. So let's compare the two. Here's a map of the Roman Empire at its height, stretching around the Mediterranean up into Europe. Now let's compare that with E1b1b. Notice how the borders match almost perfectly. Northern border in the UK, southern in North Africa, even the Arabian edge. Uncanny, right? Or do you think it's just a coincidence? Sure, E1b1b stretches a bit beyond Rome's old limits, but centuries of migration and border shifts easily explains that. This isn't coincidence. Now check out E1b1b's subclades. EM81 peaks in North Africa near Gibraltar, fading toward Egypt. It is the only subclade of E1b1b that is concentrated in North Africa. What about EV13? It's more pronounced in Greece and Macedonia, barely touching Africa. EM123 clusters near Constantinople, spilling into Syria and Persia. These hotspots, North Africa, Greece, and Constantinople, mirrors the Roman Empire's administrative zones. That's no accident. Let's rewind history a bit. Rome crushed Carthage, its North African regional rival, and took over dominion in the Mediterranean. Cities like Tangier, Algiers, Carthage, and Alexandria, all built or rebuilt by Greco-Romans. Tangiers was tied to Greek myths. Think Hercules. Carthage rose from Phoenician roots only to be razed and remade by Rome. Alexandria? Alexander the Great's masterpiece in 331 BC became the greatest city in the ancient world. It was a Greek city in the heart of North Africa. These weren't African cities, they were Greco-Roman hubs. Roman citizenship even shaped the region. If you live there, you're a citizen. That's a rule we still use today. But what about the people? Modern Berbers, descended from Greeks, Romans, and later Vandals, aren't indigenous Africans. Their name, Berber, comes from the Greek barbaros, meaning non-Greek speakers in the Hellenistic era. The real indigenous folks? Mostly gone. So is E1b1b African? This haplogroup is found only among populations that have an extensive history of race mixing. Look at the Horn of Africa, Ethiopians, Somalis, Eritreans. They've mixed with Arabs and Italians for centuries. And North Africans? Today, they consist almost entirely of the descendants of Greek, Roman, Persian, and Arab settlers. Their DNA reflects that. Even the Roman emperors, Marcus Aurelius Macrinus and Lucius Septimius Severus, were born in North Africa. Neither one of these emperors is historically referred to as indigenous African. Various studies indicate that indigenous African haplogroups are A and B. They are rare outside the continent. But E1b1b? It's tied to invaders, not natives. I know there will be viewers who will insist that the North African population is still predominantly indigenous. To those I will say that North Africa went through a similar process as Australia and North American indigenous people. They were replaced by settlers, predominantly from Europe. As a result, the E1b1b haplogroup seen in North Africa is not indigenous to the continent. There's more proof. North Africa shares European Y DNA, F, J, R, and mtDNA, like haplogroup H, with Europe. The main European mtDNA, haplogroup H, even has a higher prevalence in Tangier than in Scandinavia, Romania, Russia, or Ireland. This mtDNA haplogroup also appears in other areas where you have the E1b1b Y DNA, like Cameroon, Mali, and the Horn of Africa. Other European mtDNA haplogroups like J, U, T, K, and X also have similar maps in North Africa as the E1b1b. These mtDNAs contribute more than 50% of the maternal line in some parts of North Africa. So the question is this: if majority of the inhabitants have European mtDNA, why or how would they swap European Y DNA for an African one? The only logical answer is that the E1b1b DNA is a DNA that came into the region via Europe. It's a European DNA flowing south, it's Greco-Roman. So what's the takeaway? E1b1b tracks the Roman Empire's footprint, not an out-of-Africa story, but a Greco-Roman legacy. North Africans today are descendants of settlers, not indigenous tribes. In the next video, we'll dive into the biblical passages tying this to Noah's sons and beyond. Hit that subscribe button if you're intrigued, and let me know your thoughts below.